He was huge. Sandra Dee tells everything in her book about her life. Sandra Dee was born Alexandra Zuck on April 23, 1942 in Bayonne, New Jersey. Sandra Dee's early life had both good times and hard times. She was raised mostly by her mom, Mary Zuck, who wanted her to be famous. After her parents got divorced, young Alexandra was pushed into show business when she was very young. Her mother saw her beauty and grace and told her to start modeling as a child. By the time she was around 11 or 12, Sandra Dee had already been in many magazine ads and TV commercials. She became one of the best paid child models of that time, working for big companies like Girl Scout cookies and Coca-Cola, with her face showing up in Life and 17 magazines. But behind all the fancy stuff, there was a troubled childhood. Sandra had anorexia and felt huge pressure to stay thin, a problem that would bother her for the rest of her life. Even with these problems, she kept working, pushed by her mother's dreams and the hope of being a star. Sandra Dee made her first movie at age 14 in the 1957 drama Until They Sail, directed by Robert Weiss. Her acting got the attention of movie reviewers and people watching Galike, leading to a deal with Universal Pictures. She quickly became famous with a bunch of hit movies that used her clean, imagined young energy. Her big break role came in Imitation of Life 1959, a fancy remake of the 1934 movie. The film, starring with Lana Turner, talked about Beatrice being a mother, and Woe You Are, and it became one of the biggest money-making movies of the year. Sandra's acting as Turner's daughter, a teenager having trouble with a mom who ignored her, added real feelings to the movie and showed her growing skills as an actress. Later that same year, she was in A Summer Place, a love story that became really important. The movies look at teenage lovey and parents being fake hit home with people watching, and Max Steiner's beautiful theme music became famous. Sandra's role as Molly, a girl stuck between wanting something and doing what's right, made her a symbol of young longing and innocence. During the early 1960s, Sandra Dee starred in many box office hits, including Gig 1959, Tammy Tell Me True, 1961, and If a Man Answers, 1962. Her role in Gig was really important. It started the beach party movie type and created a perfect example of happy, hopeful American. The character of Gidget would live on in TV shows and other actresses, but Sandra Dee's first version remains the best. Her sunny personality, blonde curls, and big-eyed looks made her the perfect girl next door, and she became a household name, a favorite of TN magazines, and a role model for young girls. But the studio's marketing machine also held her back. She was often put in light comedies and romantic dramas, rarely given the chance to try more challenging roles. In 1963, Sandra Dee starred in Tammy and the Doctor, the last movie of the Tammy film series. This marked the end of her time with a character that had become famous in American pop culture for its wholesome charm and innocence. The role of Tammy, a kind-hearted, spirited young woman from the South dealing with the hard parts of the modern world, had already been played by Debbie Reynolds and others. But Dee brought a special mix of sweetness and confidence that really connected with people watching. Tammy and the Doctor had Dee in their role opposite Peter Fonda, and while the movie kept the light-hearted, romantic feel of the earlier movies, it also quietly showed the changing world of American movies. In the early 1960s, more complicated themes began to show up in regular movies. This movie was not just a continuation of a popular series. It also was a turning point in Dee's career as she began to move away from her teen image. That same year, she also was in the comedy Take Her She's Mine, starring with James Stewart. The movie, based on the play by Henry and Phoebe Frone, got ideas from the real-life experiences of their daughter, the future famous screenwriter and director Nora Ephron. Dee played a young woman named Molly Michael Elson, whose artistic free spirit creates problems with her overprotective father. The role let Dee stretch her comedy skills while also trying more complex emotional stuff, showing she might be ready for more grown-up roles. The movie's success at the box office proved her lasting popularity with audiences, and her acting struck a chord with young women who related to the cultural changes and fights between generations of the early 60s. By the end of 1963, Sandra Dee's popularity was still flying high. She was voted the 8th greatest star in the country by Theater Owners according to the yearly Motion Picture Herald poll. This ranking was proof of her widespread appeal and box office draw, putting her with major stars of that time. However, This would be the last time she appeared in the top 10 list, marking the beginning of a slow drop in her mainstream stardom. As Hollywood began to like edgier, more socially important movies and complex character studies, the clean-cut girl next door image that had defined Dee's early career was becoming less commercially good. In 1964, Dee starred in I'd Rather Be Rich, a musical romantic comedy that was a remake of the 1941 movie It Started With Eve. Once again, she worked under the direction of her frequent partner and then-husband Bobby Darin's close friend, producer Ross Hunter. The movie was designed to show off Dee's charmant musical talents, casting her as Cynthia Duane, a spirited girl caught in a web of mistaken identities and romantic mix-ups. Though not a major critical success, I'd Rather Be Rich was a pleasant, feel-good movie that tried to use the musical comedy trend and Dee's still strong fan base. It showed Hunter's continued belief in Dee as a leading lady and his desire to give her vehicles made for her strengths. The next year in 1965, Sandra Dee was put back together with Bobby Darin in the romantic comedy That Funny Feeling. This movie, their second screen working together following come September 1961, had them as a couple dealing with the quirks and mix-ups of budding romance in New York City. Audiences were excited to see the real-life husband and wife duo together again, and the movie's playful tone and easy chemistry made it a modest success. Behind the scenes, however, Dee and Darin's marriage was beginning to show signs of trouble, a reality that stood in stark contrast to their on-screen chemistry. Despite the challenges in their personal relationship, the movie remains proof of the lasting appeal they held as a couple during their Hollywood years. In 1966, Sandra dappered in A Man Could Get Killed, SB comedy starring with James Garner, Melina Mercouri, and Tony Franciosa. This movie marked her final project under her long-term contract with Universal Pictures, the studio that had trained her into a top box office star. A Man Could Get Killed was part of the 1960s wave of spy spoofs and adventure recodies inspired by the worldwide popularity of James Bond movies. Though the movie had a confusing plot and mixed reviews, it is notable for introducing the song Strangers in the Night, which would later become a massive hit for Frank Sinatra. For Dee, the movie symbolized the end of an era both professionally and personally. Her leaving Universal signaled the fading of her studio back at career and the beginning of her gradual retreat from the spotlight. Beyond her acting career, Sandra Dee also tried music during the early 1960s. While she was not mainly known as a singer, she recorded a number of singles that showed off her soft, melodic voice. Among her recordings was a cover version of the classic ballad When I Fall in Love, which had been made famous by Nat King Cole and Doris Day. Dee's version of the song revealed a tender and vulnerable side to her artistic expression, reflecting the semi-emotional honesty that had made her so relatable on screen. Her musicality, though limited, added an third dimension to her public persona and suggested a broader range of talent than she was often given credit for. These recordings were typically relative tie-ins with her movie's order of appearances, and while they didn't achieve major commercial success, they remained loved by fans who admired her gentle charm and versatility. In 1960, Sandra Dee married pop singer and actor Bobby Darin, one of the biggest musical stars of the time. Their union was heavily publicized and became one of Hollywood's most iconic pairings. Thetwo had met while filming come September 1961, and despite her mother's initial disapproval, Sandra eloped with Darin shortly after. Their marriage was both passionate and stormy. Dee was only 18 when she married Darin, and thought she genuinely loved him. The pressures of fame, career conflicts, and personal insecurities strained their relationship. They had one child, a son named Dodd. In 1961, Sandra briefly stepped away from acting to focus on motherhood, but the demands of her career and Bobby's touring schedule led to increasing distance between them. They divorced in 1967, but remained connected until Darin's early death in 1973. Sandra Dee never remarried, and friends said that she never fully got over Bobby Darin. His death deeply affected her, and in many ways their bittersweet love story became symbolic of her era, a beautiful but fading dream of innocence and romance. As the cultural landscape shifted in the late 1960s and 1972, Sandra Dee's image as the squeaky clean teen idol became outdated. Hollywood had moved on to grittier, more rebellious narratives, and Sandra found fewer roles available to her. She made a few TV appearances and acted in a handful of low-budget movies, but her star had faded. Behind the scenes, Sandra was fighting serious demons. The pressures of early fame killed her trauma, her eating disorder, and alcoholism took a severe toll on her mental and physical health. Her relationship with her mother, Aunt Close, became strained. After years off being under strict control and scrutiny, Sandra began to withdraw from public life entirely. In the 1980s and 1990s, she lived a reclusive life in Los Angeles, rarely making public appearances. Her son Bobby Darin wrote a revealing memoir, Dream Lovers, The Magnificent Shattered Lives of Bobby Darin and Sandra Dee, 1994, which painted a candid and sometimes painful portrait of her personal struggles, including childhood sexual abuse she endured and the effects of a lifetime in the spotlight. Despite her retreat from public life, many fans continue to admire and remember her fondly. The 1978 music Algreus even referenced her in the song Look at Me, I'm Sandra Dee, where the name became shorthand for outdated virtue. Though the real Sandra Dee reportedly disliked the reference, feeling it mocked her rather than honored her. In a deeply revealing chapter of her long-awaited memoir, legendary screen actress Sandra Dee finally opens up about a romance that had long been the subject of whispers and speculation in Hollywood's golden circles. Her brief but unforgettable connection with heartthrob Troy Donahue. He was huge, Dee writes, not just referring to his physical stature or movie idol good looks, but to the larger-than-life presence he gave off wherever he went. To Sandra, who had spent much of her youth under the suffocating pressures of stardom and the constant scrutiny of a tightly managed image, Troy represented something both electrifying and terrifying. Raw masculinity wrapped in the glossy packaging of Hollywood's idea of a dreamboat. They met at a studio lunch in 1960 when both were at the height of their fame. Sandra, fresh off the massive success of Imitation of Life and Gidget, was the picture of America's innocence withered. Troy, meanwhile, had rocketed into teen idol status thanks to his breakout role in A Summer Place with his golden hair, smoldering eyes, and a natural charm that made women swoon and studio executives see dollar signs. He walked in like he owned the world, Sandra remembers. Every head turned, even the air in the room seemed to shift. He had that kind of magnetism, the kind that could stop time. But beneath the glossy surface of this young, beautiful couple, both stars were navigating the brutal realities of a system that both made and controlled them. Sandra writes of how the studio pushed the idea of a romance between them for publicity, pairing their names in gossip columns and even encouraging Foserf to catch them in intimate moments. Yet, what started as a PR stunt quickly evolved into something more complicated. There was an intensity about him that was intoxicating. She writes, he could say nothing at all and still make me feel everything. Their private time together was filled with laughter, vulnerability, and the weight of secrets. Sandra describes evenings where they would escape the public eye, driving aimlessly along the California coastline, parking near the beach just to talk about their fears, their families, and the unbearable elements that often came with fame. Who understood what it meant to be adored by millions but known by none. She says, we were both trapped in images we didn't create, and then there was the physical chemistry, something Sandra hesitates to describe in detail. Butak acknowledges with a wistful honesty. Yes, he was huge, she says again, this time with a pause that suggests more than just size. In presence, in passion, in the way he could make me forget who I was expected to be, if only for a moment. For a woman who had been so tightly controlled by her mother, her studio, and the media, Troy offered a taste of rebellion, a man who defied their rules, who came with a touch of danger and unpredictability. But the romance, like many in Hollywood, burned fast and faded quickly. Sandra writes that the pressures of their careers, combined with the disapproval of those who managed their images, led them to drift apart. We were both being written like characters in someone else's script, she says. We never had a chance to write our own ending. Still, she carries the memory of him with a mixture of fondness and regret. In her memoir's most touching passage, she reflects on what might have been. Troy was a storm that passed through my life, a beautiful, reckless storm. And, though it didn't last, I'm grateful I was there to feel the rain. The 1980s marked a deeply troubled and painful chapter in the life of Sandra Dee, one of Hollywood's former darlings of the silver screen. After retreating from public life and officially retiring from acting, entered a prolonged period of poor health. both physically and emotionally. And no longer the fresh-faced angel adored by millions in the 1950s and 60s. She became increasingly isolated and described herself as a recluse. The glitz and glamour that had once defined her public image faded into distant memory, replaced by long periods of solitude and private suffering behind closed doors. Throughout this time, Dee was locked in a quiet but relentless battle against several severe health issues. Chief among them was anorexia nervosa, a disorder that had plagued her for much of her life but worsened significantly in her later years. The pressures of maintaining a perfect appearance in the entertainment industry had first planted the seeds of disordered eating in her youth, and those tendencies only deepened as she withdrew from the spotlight. Alongside her eating disorder, Dee struggled with debilitating depression and alcoholism, conditions that often fed off one another in a vicious cycle. Her emotional turmoil was compounded by a series of personal losses and disappointments, most notably the death of her beloved mother, Mary Duvon. Mary's death on December 27, 1987, from lung cancer at the age of 63, devastated who had shared an extremely close and often codependent relationship with her. Their bond had been a central part of life since childhood, with Mary managing much of her early career. The loss left Dee unmoored. In the aftermath, she plunged into one of the darkest periods of her life. Grief-stricken and without the steadying presence of her mother, Dee isolated herself even further. She later revealed in interviews that she lived in near total seclusion for months, surviving on a pitiful diet of soup, crackers, and Scotch whiskey. Her already fragile body began to waste away, and her weight plummeted to a dangerously low ATLB, 36 kilograms. The situation deteriorated to the point where her health was in critical jeopardy. At one point, Dee began vomiting blood, a sign that her body could no longer sustain the abuse it was enduring. Alarmed and desperate to save her son, Darin, her only child from her marriage to singer and actor Bobby Darin, stepped in to intervene. He convinced her to seek professional medical and psychiatric treatment. It was a turning point. Under the care of physicians and therapists, Dee began a slow and painful journey toward recovery. Her condition gradually stabilized and her mental health showed signs of improvement. For the first time in many years, she began to entertain the idea of reconnecting with life in a more meaningful way. During this period of recovery, Dee even expressed an interest in returning to work, not in movies, but in a TV situation comedy. She said that her motivation was rooted in a desire for connection and belonging. She longed to be part of a family again, even if only a fiction alone on screen. Though this comeback never materialized, it reflected her inner yearning to heal, to re-establish purpose in her life, and to reclaim even a sliver of the identity she had lost. Unfortunately, the consequences of her years of heavy drinking and smoking gently caught up with her. In 2000, Dee was diagnosed with kidney failure, a grim development that forced her to confront the reality of her health head-on. Determined to live, she stopped drinking completely. Her need for dialysis became a regular and necessary part of her existence during the final 4 years of her life. Despite her fragile condition, she maintained a quiet dignity and continued to live as best she could, supported by her son and a small circle of caregivers and friends. On February 20, 2005, Sandra had passed away from complications related to kidney disease at the Los Robles Hospital and Medical Center in Thousand Oaks, California. She was 62 years old. Her death marked the end of a life that had once glittered with fame and promise, but had also been burdened by years of silent suffering. She was laid to rest in a crypt at Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery in the Hollywood Hills, a resting place for many of the entertainment industry's most cherished figures. Though her final years were marked by struggle, Dee is remembered today not only as the iconic actress with the golden hair and innocent charm, but also as a woman who faced her demons with quiet courage and the enduring love of her son.